Hello, my name is James. I'm the founder of OpenRequirements.org, a website to share knowledge of requirements through examples and discussion. In this presentation, I'll provide my definition of what a functional requirement looks like. I've seen many websites describing what a functional requirement should look like, but I've found it difficult to find an example that, to me, is clearly unambiguous to a reader. The following slides will describe my version of a functional requirement and my reasoning behind why it's unambiguous and testable. Before providing examples, I thought it would be best to describe what I think a functional requirement should look like. This slide describes the criteria that I think must be met for a functional requirement to be identified as unambiguous and testable. The operation the system is to perform. A functional requirement describes what the system is to do. For example, confirm the saving of a record, or actually save the record itself. A functional requirement without a description is not a valid functional requirement. Who is performing the operation? Someone needs to be performing the operation. Typically, this is the system. Don't be too explicit when describing the system. You want to leave those details to the person designing the system that will satisfy your functional requirement. When the system should perform the operation. A system performing the operation described in the functional requirement needs to know when it can start performing the operation and when the operation should be complete. Why the system is performing the operation. A functional requirement must describe when it's to come into effect. For example, a functional requirement is effective when the user performs an action within the system, such as clicking a button. In my research for this presentation, I've seen other people describe the qualities of a functional requirement, for example, clear, concise, and testable. I've also seen many examples of functional requirements. However, I think a functional requirement must possess the criteria I've outlined so as to meet those qualities of being clear, concise, and testable. In the following slides, I'll present examples of functional requirements based on these criteria. From the anatomy of a functional requirement I described in the previous slide, I've created a basic template to use when writing a functional requirement. I've used this format in the past and have typically received positive feedback, particularly from system testers. The first line of the functional requirement is the operation the system is to perform. The requirement statement starts with, "The system shall." This indicates the system is to perform this operation. The second line describes when the system is to start performing the operation. Often this is after the user performs an action, but it can be at other starting points such as after the system date equals midnight. This line constrains when the system is to start performing the operation. The third line describes when the system is to complete the operation. This can be before the user can do something else within the system or before the system date equals 5 a.m. in the morning. The fourth line describes when the functional requirement is triggered. The functional requirement may be triggered in response to the user clicking a button in the system, or in response to a set of complex criteria such as the time of day and if a system flag is set. Describing this level of detail for a functional requirement provides the reader with all the information they need to validate the requirement has been realized within the system. A developer can ensure their code has met this requirement via unit testing, and a system tester can validate this requirement via test scripts or other testing methods. In this slide, I'll step through an example of a functional requirement. This example describes the system prompting the user to confirm their request to save a record they've created or modified within the system. The first line is the operation the system is to perform. You can see the operation starts with "the system shall," indicating the system is to perform this operation. In this example, the operation the system is performing is to prompt the user to confirm the saving of the record. The second line requires the operation to commence after the user has requested to save the record to the system. The format of the request would typically be the user clicking a Save button, or Ctrl+S, which is my favorite key combination. Hooray, Ctrl+S. The third line indicates that the user can't perform another operation in the system until they've acknowledged the confirmation prompt. Finally, the fourth line describes the event that triggers the system to perform the operation. In this case, Since the user must confirm the save operation before being permitted to perform another action in the system, this line is very similar to the second line, where the system must commence the operation. As you can see, this functional requirement leaves no room for flexibility. The designer must design a system that prompts the user to confirm the saving of the record immediately upon the user clicking the Save button, and the user can't do anything else within the system until they've acknowledged the confirmation prompt. In this slide, I'll walk through another example of a functional requirement based on the anatomy I described at the beginning of this presentation. This example requires the system to calculate the interest rate for a record. The first line, similar to the previous example, includes the operation to perform and indicates the system shall be performing that operation. The second line, like in the previous example, indicates this operation is to commence after the user has requested to calculate the interest rate. The third line indicates the user can't do anything else with this record until a recalculation has completed. In this example, the time frame within which this operation is to be performed differs from the previous example. A reason this constraint is here is the system may be busy executing business rules and retrieving data from other systems to complete the calculation. It provides the designer of the system some flexibility on when the recalculation operation is to be performed. The fourth line describes the event triggering this functional requirement. In this example, the user has requested the interest be recalculated on this record. Stating the functional requirement using this structure provides the reader with sufficient information to realize this operation may or may not be completed immediately. The owner of the system may not care that the system is unable to recalculate the interest rate immediately, but it does provide the designer with some flexibility as to how to implement this functional requirement. For example, a periodic occurrence, such as every 5 minutes, or an overnight batch. I hope this information helps you when writing functional requirements that are unambiguous and testable. You can find me, this PowerPoint presentation, and other examples at openrequirements.org. Feel free to provide feedback about this presentation. I'm always on the lookout for insights to help me improve my writing of functional requirements.